Look at Lachlan Kennedy. Kennedy is matching him stride for stride here. Might even take this one, and he is going to take it, or does he? No!
Lachlan Kennedy stood on a soaked track at Scotstoun Stadium in Glasgow, wind gusting through the Commonwealth Games 100-meter final. Nobody expected fireworks tonight, but the 22-year-old from Brisbane tore through the storm and shattered an Australian record that had stood since 2003, months before he was even born. Australia hadn't seen this in decades. The 2026 Commonwealth Games had already delivered plenty of drama in Glasgow, but nothing prepared the crowd at Scotstoun Stadium for what happened in the men's 100-meter final. The conditions were miserable. Rain fell in sheets, puddles gathered along the lanes, and a swirling headwind made a fast time look almost impossible. Sprinters need dry tracks and still air to hit peak speed, and Tuesday night in Scotland offered neither. Yet 8 of the fastest men in the Commonwealth lined up anyway, shivering under the floodlights, knowing a medal here meant more than almost anywhere else in the sport. Among them stood Lachlan Kennedy, the 22-year-old sprinter from Brisbane, who had spent his entire season chasing a barrier that had eluded Australian sprinters for over 2 decades, running 100 meters in under 10 seconds, legally, on a night that made a mockery of the entire idea that fast times need fast conditions. Kennedy had already served notice earlier that evening. In his semi-final heat, he clocked 9.94 seconds, putting every other finalist on alert in a season where he had already broken the 10-second barrier on home soil. It meant he walked into the final having already rewritten his own personal best once that night, with the biggest race still to come. Fellow Australian Eddie Nketiah was chasing his own breakthrough too, running a personal best of 10.03 seconds in the semis to sneak into the final as one of 3 Australians racing across the 2 100-meter finals that evening. When the gun cracked, Cameroon's Emmanuel Eseme exploded out of the blocks first, his trademark start putting him ahead before the rest of the field had even found their rhythm. Eseme is a late bloomer by sprinting standard, a 32-year-old who only picked up the sport 8 years earlier. Yet he drove hard through the rain and refused to let the wet tracks slow him down. Kennedy, chasing from just outside him, built his speed through the middle of the race the way he always does, closing ground as the Cameroonian tried to hold his lead. By 60 meters, 3 men were locked in a genuine sprint for the podium. Eseme was out front, Kennedy was surging on the outside, and Nigeria's Kanyensola Ajayi refused to fade behind them. The soaked crowd at Scotstoun Stadium watched as the trio hit the final 20 meters almost shoulder to shoulder, spray kicking up off the wet lanes with every stride. Kennedy dipped hard at the line, throwing his chest forward the way sprinters do when every 100th of a second counts. It wasn't enough to catch Eseme, who crossed first in a blistering 9.83 seconds, but it was more than enough to hold off Ajayi and lock in second place. For a moment, nobody in the stadium seemed certain who had actually won silver. Then the scoreboard flashed, and the Australian section of the crowd erupted. The numbers on that scoreboard told an incredible story. Eseme's winning time of 9.83 seconds shattered a Commonwealth Games record that had lasted 28 years, a mark set by the legendary Otto Bolden back in Kuala Lumpur in 1998. Kennedy's silver medal run of 9.85 seconds made him the second fastest man in Commonwealth Games history, and he did it on a wet track into a headwind, conditions that almost never produce times that quick. Ajayi claimed bronze in 9.90 seconds, and South Africa's Gift Liatlela missed the podium by a single 100th of a second, finishing 4th in 9.91. 4 men all under 10 seconds in pouring rain. It was officially the fastest 100-meter final in Commonwealth Games history, and athletics experts were already calling it one of the deepest sprint fields assembled anywhere outside the Olympics or the World Championships. Eseme admitted afterward that he had spent the entire season chasing a time close to 9.9 and never expected to run 9.83 rain or no rain. Further back in the field, Nketiah crossed in 10.06 seconds for 6th, a result that would have been a career highlight most nights, but got swallowed up by just how fast the 4 men ahead of him were flying. For Kennedy, the number that mattered most wasn't the silver medal itself. It was the record he broke to get it. Patrick Johnson ran 9.93 seconds back in May of 2003, a mark that survived every Australian sprinter who tried to beat it for more than 2 decades. Kennedy wasn't born until November of that same year, several months after Johnson set the record he would eventually take down. Think about that for a second. Kennedy spent his entire life chasing a time that existed before he did. This breakthrough wasn't a fluke either. Kennedy had been building toward this moment for years. He ran a leg for Australia's 4x100 relay team at the 2024 Olympics in Paris, where the squad set an Oceanian record before crashing out in the heats. He took silver at the World Indoor Championships over 60 meters in Nanjing in 2025, chasing down some of the fastest short sprinters on the planet. And all season long, he had been locked in a public rivalry with Australia's other young sprint sensation, Gout Gout, both of them chasing the honor of becoming the first Australian to break 10 seconds legally. Gout got there first, but with an illegal tailwind that didn't count. Kennedy made it clear afterward that he wanted his sub-10-second run to be the real one. In Glasgow, in the rain, on the biggest stage of his career, he finally got it, and then some. Kennedy's silver carried weight beyond his own career, too. Australia had not won a men's 100-meter medal at the Commonwealth Games since 1962, when Michael Cleary claimed bronze. That is 64 years of talented Australian sprinters showing up to this event and going home without a medal. Generations of runners came through the national program and never once stood on that podium. Kennedy ended that drought in the worst possible conditions, on a track that should have slowed everyone down, against a field that somehow ran faster anyway. It is the kind of result that reshapes how people think about a country's sprinting program overnight, and it landed on a night that Australian athletics fans will be replaying for years. Kennedy wasn't even the only Australian making history at Scotstoun Stadium that night. Just races earlier, 21-year-old Torrie Lewis had rewritten the women's 100-meter record book in the exact same rain. Lewis broke her own national record in the semi-final, then broke it again, hours later in the final, crossing the line in 10.99 seconds to become the first Australian woman ever to dip under 11 seconds. She finished third behind New Zealand's Zoe Hobbs, who won gold in 10.93, and England's Amy Hunt, who claimed silver in 10.98. 2 Australian sprinters, 2 medals, 2 national records on the same soaking wet night at the same stadium. Kennedy could barely believe it afterward, saying it felt almost unheard of for Australia to walk away with 2 sprint medals from a single Commonwealth Games. Kennedy didn't hide his excitement in the moments after the race. He talked about Australian track being in the strongest position he had ever seen it, pointing to a mix of hungry young athletes and experienced veterans all peaking at the same time. It's hard to argue with him. Between Kennedy's breakthrough, Lewis's record run, and a rising star like Gout Gout still waiting in the wings, Australia suddenly has a sprint group that can compete with anyone in the world, not just at Commonwealth level, but heading into major championships and eventually another Olympics.